Elra's lab was a sanctuary of light and sound, a place where the mysteries of Lirys' bioluminescent life unfolded before her eyes. Her floating home bobbed gently on the waves, its lower levels submerged to allow direct access to the underwater world. Through the large, transparent walls, she could see the sprawling coral reefs, their structures aglow with a myriad of colors, blues, greens, and purples pulsing like the heartbeat of the planet. Schools of Luminara fish darted among the corals, their bodies flashing intricate patterns that spoke of courtship and rivalry. A silent dance beneath the waves. Seated at her workstation, Elra adjusted the settings on her holographic display, zooming in on a particularly vibrant specimen. The Luminara's light show was mesmerizing, each pulse and flicker a word in a language she was determined to understand. Her own skin, a canvas of soft, shifting hues, reflected her concentration, glowing a steady blue as she worked. As a Voran biologist, Elra's bioluminescence was both a tool and a trait, her body mirroring the creatures she studied. Her webbed fingers moved deftly over the controls, a subtle reminder of her species' amphibious nature. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts, signaling an incoming message. Glancing at the communication panel, she saw Varen's light signature, a rapid series of green and yellow pulses. Decoded through her equipment, it read, "Any breakthroughs today?" Elra's lips curved into a smile, her skin warming to a gentle orange. She tapped out a response on the light pad, her fingers creating a sequence of pulses, still decoding the Luminara's mating dances. Their complexity is astounding. The Voran communicated through light and low-frequency sounds, a method as natural to her as breathing. It was a language of subtlety, one she had honed over years of study. Varen's reply came swiftly. "Keep at it. Your work could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies communication." Encouraged, Elra leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head. The lab was her haven, filled with the hum of equipment and the soft glow of bioluminescent samples. Jars lined the shelves, each containing a different species, tiny jelly-like creatures, eel-like swimmers, and delicate coral fragments, their lights pulsing in rhythmic patterns. It was a symphony of life, and she was its conductor, orchestrating the study of their secrets. She loved this work, the meticulous observation and the thrill of discovery. But sometimes, she felt a pang of loneliness. The Voran were a communal species, their floating villages a web of interconnected lives. Yet her research often kept her isolated in this solitary outpost. Perhaps that's why the memory of Jace lingered so strongly. It was a connection to something beyond her world. A rare moment when her light had touched a life so different from her own. As if summoned by her thoughts, a glint of metal caught her eye. Nestled among her tools was a small, tarnished object, a patch from a human uniform. Its threads frayed but the insignia still visible, a stylized star encircled by a ring. She picked it up, the weight of it familiar in her hand, and the memory flooded back as if it were yesterday. 20 years ago, the skies of Lirys had been torn apart by the arrival of a damaged spacecraft. Elra had been younger then, less experienced, but her curiosity had drawn her to the crash site. She had swum through the dark waters to reach it, her body glowing faintly to guide her way. There, amid the wreckage that had sunk beneath the waves, she found him, Jace Calder, a human pilot, injured and surrounded by Kryvox. The Kryvox were nightmarish creatures, parasitic beings that infested abandoned ships and turned them into instruments of destruction. Their bodies were a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical parts, tendrils of flesh entwined with jagged metal. Their forms illuminated by a sickly green glow. They moved with a predatory grace that sent shivers down her spine. Their intent clear as they swarmed around Jace's broken vessel. Jace had been trapped, his leg pinned under a twisted piece of hull, his face pale with pain and fear as the Kryvox closed in. Elra acted on instinct, her analytical mind giving way to a surge of compassion. Her body flared with intense light, a brilliant cascade of white and gold, mimicking the distress signals of the Kryvox themselves. Confused, the creatures hesitated, their movements faltering as they turned toward her instead of their prey. It was just long enough for her to dart forward, free Jace from the debris, and pull him into the water. They had hidden in a nearby underwater cave, the Kryvox eventually losing interest and departing with their stolen ship. In the dim light filtering through the water, Jace had tried to speak. His words a jumble of sounds she couldn't understand. But his eyes, wide and dark, conveyed gratitude. And before he climbed into the escape pod that had surfaced nearby, he pressed the uniform patch into her hand. A token of thanks from a stranger in a strange land. Elra clutched the patch now. The memory still vivid. That encounter had changed her, sparking a fascination with other species and their ways. It had driven her to study bioluminescence not just as a biologist, but as a bridge between worlds. She had even learned some human language from salvaged data, though she doubted she would ever need it. Still, the question lingered. Would she ever see him again? A sudden beep from her console snapped her back to the present. Frowning, she set the patch aside and checked the readings. An anomalous signal was emanating from the edge of the system, its pattern unlike anything she had seen before. Her skin prickled with unease as she analyzed the data, her glow shifting to a pale yellow, a sign of her growing anxiety. The signal's frequency was low, almost subsonic, and it carried a distinct signature, one that her instruments identified as Kryvox in origin. Elra's heart raced. The Kryvox were back, and they were heading towards Lirys. The console beeped insistently, the signal's intensity increasing. She cross-referenced the data with her database, confirming her worst fears. It was indeed a Kryvox signature, and it was getting closer. She needed to act quickly. Activating the communication array, she sent an urgent message to the Voran Council. Her light pulses sharp and urgent. Anomalous signal detected. Kryvox signature confirmed. Approaching Lirys. But she knew the truth. The Voran were a peaceful species. Their floating cities designed for harmony, not war. Lyrys's defenses were woefully inadequate against such a foe. They needed help, and fast. As she gazed out at the shimmering waters, the coral reefs glowing softly in the twilight, a thought struck her. Perhaps there was another way. The humans owed her a debt, didn't they? Jace had been grateful, and maybe, just maybe, they would come to her aid. It was a long shot, but in times of desperation, even the slimmest hope was worth pursuing. With a deep breath, Elra steeled herself. The light of Lirys, once a beacon of life and discovery, now seemed fragile against the encroaching darkness. But she would not let it be extinguished without a fight. Whatever was coming, she would face it, with her mind, her courage, and the light that defined her. Chapter 2. The Kryvox Threat. The waters of Lirys trembled faintly as Elra stood before her console, her glowing eyes fixed on the pulsing signal. The data streamed across the holographic display, painting a grim picture. The Kryvox were not just passing through, they were converging on her world. The signal had grown stronger in the last hour, its rhythm steady and deliberate, like the heartbeat of a predator stalking its prey. Her skin flickered erratically, shifting from pale yellow to a deep, anxious violet, a rare hue for a Voran. She forced herself to breathe, the humid air of her lab heavy in her lungs. Outside, the coral reefs glowed with their usual brilliance, oblivious to the danger lurking beyond the planet's misty atmosphere. Elra tapped her light pad, sending another urgent message to the Voran Council. Kryvox signal intensifying. Estimated arrival within 3 rotations. Request immediate defensive measures. Her pulses were sharp, almost frantic, a stark contrast to the measured calm she usually maintained. The response came quickly, its green pulses soft and apologetic. Council acknowledges your alert. Elra, defensive capabilities limited. We are convening to discuss options. Elra stared at the words, her glow dimming. Limited capabilities? She knew what that meant. Lirys had no standing army, no fleet of warships. Their floating cities were marvels of engineering, designed to harmonize with the planet's ecosystem, not to fend off invaders. The Voran relied on diplomacy in their remote location for protection, but neither would deter the Kryvox. She turned to her database, pulling up everything she knew about the enemy. The Kryvox were a scourge of the galaxy, parasitic entities that thrived on chaos. Unlike traditional species, they didn't build their own ships, they hijacked them, infesting abandoned vessels with their organic tendrils and turning them into grotesque hybrids of flesh and metal. Elra recalled the ship she'd seen 20 years ago, its hull pulsating with their sickly green light, its movements jerky yet precise. They weren't driven by conquest or greed, but by an insatiable instinct to consume and destroy. Her fingers hesitated over the console as she considered her next move. The Voran Council might dither, but she couldn't afford to wait. The Kryvox wouldn't negotiate or pause, they would strike. And Lirys would be defenseless. She needed allies, and there was only one authority in the galaxy with the power to intervene: the Galactic Alliance. Activating the interstellar communicator, a device rarely used in her isolated lab, Elra composed a message, her voice, translated into the Alliance's common tongue via her salvaged human tech, trembled slightly as she spoke. "This is Elra of Lirys. A Voran biologist. We've detected a Kryvox fleet approaching our system. Our defenses are minimal, and we urgently request assistance. Please respond." She encoded the message with her light signature and sent it, watching as the signal vanished into the void. Hours passed, the silence of her lab broken only by the soft lapping of waves against the hull. Elra paced, her webbed feet leaving faint wet prints on the floor. She tried to focus on her Luminara research, but her mind kept drifting to the signal, to the Kryvox, to the fragile beauty of Lirys hanging in the balance. When the communicator finally chimed, she lunged for it, her skin flaring with hope. The reply was curt, delivered in the clipped tones of an Alliance official. Lirys' request received. After review, the Galactic Alliance declines intervention. Your system lacks strategic value, and Kryvox activity does not currently threaten core worlds. Recommend self-evacuation if possible. Transmission ends. Elra's glow faded to a dull gray, the color of despair. Strategic value? Self-evacuation? The Alliance's words were a cold dismissal, a death sentence wrapped in bureaucracy. Lirys had no evacuation fleet. Most Voran couldn't survive long away from their water-rich environment. She sank into her chair, the weight of the rejection pressing down on her like the depths of the ocean. Through the transparent walls, she watched a Luminara fish dart past, its light flickering in a carefree dance. How could the Alliance abandon them? The Voran had contributed to the galaxy. Her own research on bioluminescence had aided medical advancements on distant worlds. Yet here they were, deemed expendable. Anger flared within her, her skin igniting with a brief burst of red before settling into a muted blue. She couldn't give up. There had to be another way. Her thoughts turned to Jace Calder, the human she'd saved all those years ago. Humans were a minor species in galactic politics. Their technology primitive compared to the Alliance's. But they were tenacious. She remembered Jace's gratitude, the way he'd pressed the uniform patch into her hand as if it were a promise. Could that act of kindness, buried in the past, be her salvation now? Elra retrieved the patch from her desk, tracing its faded star with a webbed finger. The humans had no obligation to help, and she had no idea if Jace was even alive. 20 years was a long time for a species with such short lifespans, or so she'd read. But desperation left no room for doubt. She had to try. Returning to the communicator, she adjusted its frequency to an old human channel she'd salvaged from Jace's wrecked ship. Her voice steadied as she recorded, "This is Elra of Lirys. 20 years ago, I saved a human named Jace Calder from the Kryvox in our waters. Now, my world faces the same threat. The Galactic Alliance has abandoned us, and I have no one else to turn to. If Jace or any human hears this, please, we need your help." She hesitated, then added, "I don't know if this will reach you, but I hope the light of that day still means something." The message launched into space, a fragile beacon amid the stars. Elra leaned against the console, her glow pulsing faintly with a mix of hope and uncertainty. She had no idea what humans could do against the Kryvox, or if they'd even care. Their ships were clunky, their presence in the galaxy unremarkable. Yet something about Jace, the determination in his eyes, the strength in his grip, lingered in her memory. Outside, a low rumble vibrated through the water, barely perceptible but enough to stir the coral reefs. Elra's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she checked the signal again. It was closer now, its rhythm more pronounced. The Kryvox were accelerating their approach, and time was slipping away. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the misty atmosphere met the endless sea. The light of Lirys had guided her all her life, illuminating the unknown. Now, it was her only weapon, her only hope. Whether the humans answered or not, She would fight to protect her world, with every pulse of her being. Chapter 3. A Debt Remembered. The hum of machinery filled the cramped cockpit of Jace Calder's salvage ship. The Stellar Drift. The vessel was a patchwork of scavenged parts, rusted panels bolted onto a frame that groaned under its own weight, but it was home. Jace leaned back in the pilot's seat, his boots propped on the console, a flickering holoscreen casting shadows across his weathered face. At 38, he carried the scars of a hard life, a jagged line across his temple from a near miss with a plasma cutter, and eyes that held a restless fire beneath their tired edges. He was a man who lived on the fringes, salvaging wrecks and dodging trouble in the vast emptiness of space. The holoscreen looped a grainy advertisement for a merchant run to the Orion Belt. But Jace barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, drifting to a memory he couldn't shake, a memory of water and light, of a world that wasn't his own. 20 years ago, he'd been a brash young pilot, barely out of training, when his ship had malfunctioned and crashed into the swamps of Lirys. The Kryvox had come for him then, their grotesque forms slithering through the wreckage, tendrils snapping like whips. He'd been sure he was dead, until she appeared. Elra, her name echoed in his thoughts like a beacon. She'd been a vision, her body glowing with an otherworldly radiance that cut through the murky darkness. He could still see her, swimming toward him with a grace that defied the chaos, her light flaring to confuse the Kryvox. She'd pulled him free, her webbed hands strong and steady, and hidden him in a cave until the danger passed. In that fleeting moment of safety, he'd given her his uniform patch, a star circled by a ring, because words had failed him. Then he'd climbed into an escape pod and left, vowing to repay her someday. The vow had faded over the years, buried under the grind of survival. Humans weren't big players in the galaxy. They scraped by with outdated tech and stubborn grit. Jace had traded his pilot wings for a salvage license, chasing profit over heroics. Yet Elra lingered in his mind, a flicker of light in the dark expanse of his life. A sharp beep jolted him upright, his boots hitting the floor with a thud. The Stellar Drift's comms array blinked red, an incoming message cutting through the static. Jace frowned. Few people had his frequency, and fewer still bothered to use it. He tapped the console, and a voice emerged, soft but urgent, tinged with an alien cadence he couldn't place. "This is Elra of Lirys. 20 years ago, I saved a human named Jace Calder from the Kryvox in our waters. Now, my world faces the same threat. The Galactic Alliance has abandoned us, and I have no one else to turn to. If Jace or any human hears this, please, we need your help." The message looped, each word sinking into him like a stone. Jace's breath caught, his hand hovering over the controls. Elra, alive, and in danger. The Kryvox, those damned parasites, were back, and she was calling for him. His chest tightened, a mix of guilt and adrenaline surging through him. He'd never forgotten her, but he'd never gone back either. Life had a way of piling debts you meant to pay but never did. He replayed the message, her voice stirring that old memory into sharp focus. The water closing over his head, the Kryvox's eerie glow, her light breaking through it all. She'd risked herself for him. A stranger from a species most aliens dismissed as insignificant. And now her world was burning, or drowning. More likely. And she'd reached across the stars to find him. Jace slammed his fist on the console, the sound echoing in the cockpit. "Damn it," he muttered. The Galactic Alliance abandoning Lirys didn't surprise him. They only cared about core worlds with fat trade routes. But the Kryvox? He knew their kind. Relentless. Mindless. A plague that didn't stop until everything was consumed. Lirys wouldn't stand a chance, not without help. He stood, pacing the narrow space, his mind racing. He wasn't a soldier. The Stellar Drift was a salvage rig, not a warship. Its only weapons a pair of outdated plasma cutters meant for slicing wrecks. Not fighting parasites. Earth's military wouldn't lift a finger for a backwater planet like Lirys. They barely had ships to spare for their own colonies. Going alone was suicide, but doing nothing? That was worse. Jace stopped, staring at the uniform patch he kept pinned to the cockpit wall, a faded relic of his old life. A reminder of her. Elra had saved him when no one else would. He owed her, and debts like that didn't fade with time. He dropped back into the seat, hands flying over the controls. First, he pulled up star charts, plotting a course to Lirys. It was a 3-day jump at max speed, assuming the drift's engines didn't give out. Then he hacked into a merchant comms network, a trick he'd picked up from years of scavenging, searching for chatter about the Kryvox. Fragments of reports trickled in. A derelict freighter spotted near the Lirys system, its hull crawling with green tendrils. Confirmation enough. Jace's jaw tightened. He couldn't take on a Kryvox fleet alone. But he wasn't defenseless. Humans had a knack for improvisation, a trait born from necessity. He'd salvaged enough wrecks to know how to turn junk into something useful. Maybe he could rig the drift with a few surprises, plasma traps, decoy drones, anything to even the odds. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not for a whole planet. His gaze drifted to the merchant network again. An idea sparking. Earth might not have an armada, but it had traders, roughneck haulers who'd fight if the price was right. He'd crossed paths with plenty of them, grizzled captains with ships as battered as his own, always hungry for a score. The Kryvox left behind wrecks, valuable ones, packed with tech and salvageable alloys. That could be the bait. Jace grinned, a reckless edge to it. He'd need a crew, a plan, and a hell of a lot of luck. But he'd be damned if he let Elra's light go out without a fight. He switched the comms to a broad merchant frequency and leaned into the mic, his voice low and steady. "This is Jace Calder, captain of the Stellar Drift. I've got a job, high risk, high reward. Kryvox are hitting Lirys, and I'm heading in to stop them. Salvage rights on every wreck we take down. Who's with me?" He sent the call and leaned back, heart pounding. The cockpit fell silent, the hum of the ship his only answer. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, a crackle, a reply. "This is Captain Mara of the Iron Hauler. What's the cut?" Jace's grin widened. One down. He was going back to Lirys, not as a victim this time, but as a reckoning. Elra had called, and he'd make damn sure she wasn't alone when the darkness came. Chapter 4. Rallying the Merchants. The Stellar Drift's cockpit buzzed with static as replies trickled in, each voice rougher than the last. Jace Calder sat hunched over the comms, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the console. Captain Mara's response had cracked the dam, and now the merchant network was alive with chatter, some curious, some skeptical, all hungry for details. He'd thrown out the bait. Kryvox wrecks, ripe for salvage, a payout that could turn a hauler's lean year into a windfall. But bait alone wouldn't hook them. He needed to sell it. "This is Jace Calder again," he said into the mic, voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking through him. "Lirys is 3 days out. Kryvox are swarming it. Derelict ships loaded with tech, alloys. The works. We hit them hard. We claim the spoils. Equal cuts for every ship that joins. Who's in?" The replies came fast. "Tauren, Rust Fang. Count me in. Kryvox scrap pays better than ore runs." Another voice cut through, gruff and skeptical. "Dax. Heavy mule. You're insane. Calder. Kryvox'll chew your junker to bits. What's your firepower?" Then a third, dry as dust. "Lena. Swift Claw. I'm listening, but you'd better have a plan. Hotshot." Jace grinned, the reckless edge back in his eyes. "Firepower's what we make it. Dax. Plan's simple. We turn their wrecks into our weapons. I've got tricks up my sleeve, plasma traps, decoys. You bring your ships. I'll handle the rest." It was half bluff, half truth. The drift had a few salvaged gadgets, but he'd need more than that to face a Kryvox fleet. Still, confidence was currency out here, and he spent it freely. An hour later, he'd patched together a ragtag crew. Mara's Iron Hauler, Tauren's Rust Fang, Dax's Heavy Mule, and Lena's Swift Claw. 4 ships, counting his own, hardly a fleet. But it was a start. They agreed to rendezvous at a derelict fueling station on the edge of Earth's system, a rusting hulk orbiting a dead moon. Jace set the drift's course and punched the engines, the ship shuddering as it lurched into motion. The station loomed into view 12 hours later, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the moon's gray expanse. The other ships were already there, docked haphazardly along the station's crumbling arms. Jace guided the drift into position, the docking clamps screeching as they locked on. He grabbed his toolkit, a battered case of wrenches, welders, and scavenged tech, and headed for the airlock, his boots clanging on the metal floor. The station's central hub was a cavernous mess of exposed pipes and flickering lights. The air thick with the tang of rust and fuel. The captains waited, their silhouettes stark against the dim glow. Mara was a wiry woman with a shaved head and a plasma pistol slung low on her hip. Torin, broad and bearded, leaned on a crate, his arms crossed. Dax, a squat man with a perpetual scowl, paced like a caged animal. Lena stood apart, her sharp eyes sizing Jace up, a coil of wire dangling from her hand like a whip. "All right, Calder," Dax growled, jabbing a finger at him. "You dragged us out here. Show us this genius plan before I fly my mule back to a sane job." Jace dropped his toolkit with a clang and spread his hands. "Simple. Kryvox infest ships. They don't build them. That means every Rex got tech we can strip and turn against them. I've rigged plasma cutters into traps before. Slice through their tendrils like butter. We outfit your haulers with those. Add some decoys to draw their fire. And hit him where it hurts." Mara raised an eyebrow, her voice cool. "You're betting our lives on scrap and luck. What's on Lirys worth this?" Jace met her gaze, unflinching. "A debt. 20 years back. A Voran named Elra pulled me out of a Kryvox wreck. Now they're hitting her world. And the Alliance won't lift a finger. We save Lirys. We get the salvage, and a damn good story to tell." Torin chuckled, a deep rumble. "I like stories. End credits. I'm in. My fangs got hull plating thick enough to ram those bastards." Lena twirled her wire, smirking. "Swift claws fast. I'll run your decoys. But if this goes south, I'm out first." She paused, eyes narrowing. "Voran, huh? Heard they glow like stars. What's your Elra like?" Jace hesitated, the memory of Elra's light flashing in his mind. "Brave, smart. She's why I'm still breathing." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The truth sold itself. Dax snorted, unconvinced. "Sentimental crap. Kryvox'll shred us. Parasites don't care about debts. My mule's a hauler, not a fighter. You're asking me to die for some fishwoman I don't know." The air tensed, the others shifting uneasily. Jace stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "You're not dying, Dax. You're getting rich. Kryvox Rex fetch triple what ore does, enough to buy you a new ship and a year's worth of booze. Walk away, and you're just another hauler scraping by. Join us, and you're a legend." Dax glared, his scowl deepening, but he didn't argue. Greed was a hell of a motivator. And Jace knew it. After a long beat, Dax spat on the floor. "Fine, but if your traps fail, I'm ramming your drift out of spite." "Deal." Jace shot back, hiding a grin. He turned to the group. "Let's get to work. We've got 2 days to turn these rust buckets into a fighting force." The station became a hive of activity. Jace led the charge, barking orders as they stripped the station's junk piles for parts. Mara and Torin welded plasma cutters onto their ship's hulls. The beams jury rigged to fire short, lethal bursts. Lena scavenged old drones, rigging them with signal flares to mimic ship signatures, decoys to confuse the Kryvox. Dax grumbled but hauled in heavy plating, reinforcing the mule's weak spots. Jace worked alongside them, his hands black with grease as he patched the drift's engines for the long haul. Sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't slow. Every clank of metal, every spark of a welder, was a step closer to Lirys, to Elra. He couldn't shake her voice from the message, the quiet desperation in it. She'd called him, after all this time, and he'd be damned if he let her down. As the second day dawned, the ships stood transformed, not sleek warships, but bristling hulks ready to brawl. The iron hauler gleamed with jagged cutters. The rust fang loomed like a battering ram. The swift claw buzzed with drones, and the heavy mule hulked with extra armor. The stellar drift led them, its patchwork frame hiding a few surprises of its own. Jace gathered the captains one last time, the station's lights flickering overhead. "We're not an army," he said, voice rough with fatigue and resolve. "We're scavengers, traders, survivors. Kryvox won't know what hit him. Next stop, Lirys. Let's make it count." Mara nodded, her pistol hand steady. Torin clapped him on the shoulder, a bear-like grin splitting his beard. Lena flashed a thumbs up, her drones humming behind her. Dax just grunted, but his eyes glinted with reluctant fire. The airlock hissed as they boarded their ships, engines roaring to life. Jace settled into the Drift's cockpit, the uniform patch glinting on the wall. He punched the coordinates for Lirys, the stars streaking past as the makeshift fleet leapt into the void. The Kryvox were waiting, but so was he. And he wasn't alone anymore. Chapter 5. Journey to Lirys. The void stretched endless before the stellar drift, a sea of black pierced by the faint glow of distant stars. Jace Calder gripped the controls, his eyes locked on the navigation display as the makeshift fleet hurtled toward Lirys. The Iron Hauler, Rust Fang, Heavy Mule, and Swift Claw flanked him, their engines groaning under the strain of max speed. 3 days. That's what he'd promised Elra, and every second counted. The cockpit hummed with tension, the patched-up console flickering as it tracked their jump through hyperspace. Status check. Jace barked into the comms, his voice cutting through the static. Mara's cool tone came first. Iron Hauler holding steady, cutters charged and ready. Rust Fang's good. Tauren rumbled, engines hot, but she'll make it. Swift Claw here. Lena chimed in, her voice sharp. Drones primed. We're fast and mean. Dax's grumble followed, predictably sour. Heavy Mule's rattling like a tin can. Better not be a waste. Calder. Jace smirked. Keep up, Dax. Legends don't quit. He muted the comms, leaning back as the fleet settled into formation. They weren't pretty. 5 battered haulers against a Kryvox swarm, but they had grit. And he'd bet on that any day. The first day passed in a blur of routine, engine tweaks, course corrections, and restless silence. Jace kept Elra's message on loop in his head, her voice a tether pulling him forward. He'd salvaged enough wrecks to know the Kryvox weren't invincible. Cut their tendrils, fry their cores, and they'd fall. The trick was getting close enough without being torn apart. Trouble hit on the second day. Halfway through the jump, a proximity alarm blared, red lights flashing across the Drift's cockpit. Jace snapped upright, scanning the sensors. What the hell? His words cut off as the display locked onto a target, a lone Kryvox scout ship. Its hull a twisted mess of metal and glowing green flesh, drifting just off their path. Contact, he shouted into the comms. Kryvox scout, dead ahead, weapons hot, now. The fleet jolted into action. Through the viewport, Jace saw the scout ship pivot, its tendrils flailing as it registered their approach. It was small, barely a frigate, but fast, its organic thrusters pulsing as it lunged toward them. A crackling beam of green energy lanced from its core, grazing the Rust Fang's hull. Shields holding. Tauren roared. That all you got, you slimy bastards? Evasive, Jace ordered, yanking the Drift's controls. The ship groaned, banking hard as another beam scorched the space where he'd been. Lena, decoys, go. On it. Lena's swift claw darted forward, releasing a swarm of drones. The tiny machines flared to life, mimicking ship signatures with bursts of light and static. The Kryvox scout hesitated, its tendrils whipping toward the decoys as Lena pulled back. Nice one, Mara said, her iron hauler swinging into position. My turn. She triggered her plasma cutters, twin beams slicing through space. One missed, but the other hit, severing a tendril clean off. The scout shuddered, green ichor spraying into the void. Jace saw his chance. Dax, ram it. Tauren, cover him. Finally, Dax snarled. The heavy mule surged forward, its reinforced prow gleaming. Tauren's Rust Fang matched pace, soaking up a barrage of energy blasts as Dax closed in. The mule slammed into the scout's side with a bone-rattling crunch, metal and flesh crumpling under the impact. The Kryvox ship spun out, its core sparking wildly. Finish it. Jace swung the Drift around, activating his own plasma trap, a salvaged cutter rigged to overload. He fired, the beam punching through the scout's core. A silent explosion lit the void, the ship disintegrating into a cloud of debris and fading green light. The comms erupted. Hell yeah, Tauren whooped. That's how we do it. Clean kill, Lena said, her drones circling back. Not bad for a first dance. Mules dented, Dax muttered, but all alive. Wreck's ours, right? Damn right. Jace replied, exhaling hard. Salvage it quick. We're not stopping. The fleet converged on the wreckage, their cargo arms snagging chunks of metal and tech. It wasn't much, just a taste of the hull waiting on Lirys, but it proved they could fight. Jace watched the hull come aboard, his mind already racing ahead. The scout was astray, the real swarm was still out there. And this little victory wouldn't mean a thing if they didn't reach Elra in time. As the fleet resumed course, Jace opened a private channel to the Iron Hauler. Mara, that beam. Any guesses on their range? Short, she said, her voice clipped. They're ambush predators, hit hard up close. But they're sloppy at distance. Your decoys threw it off. Good to know. He cut the line, filing the intel away. The Kryvox relied on surprise and numbers. Strip those away. And they were vulnerable. His plan was taking shape. Use speed and misdirection to break their lines. Then carve them up. Risky as hell, but it was all they had. The third day dawned, or what passed for dawn in hyperspace. A faint shimmer as they neared the Lirys system. Jace sent a tight beam message ahead, hoping Elra's equipment could catch it. This is Jace Calder, inbound with backup. Hold on, we're coming. He didn't know if she'd hear it, but saying it aloud steadied him. The comms crackled as the fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the misty blue orb of Lirys filling the viewport. It was breathtaking, oceans glinting under a hazy sky, coral reefs glowing faintly even from orbit. But the beauty was marred by streaks of green light cutting through the atmosphere. Kryvox ships. Dozens of them, descending like locusts. Holy, Torin's voice faltered. That's a damn swarm. Steady, Jace snapped. We've got this. Form up, decoys first. Then we punch through. Punch through that? Dax growled. You're crazier than I thought. Crazy works. Lena shot back. Let's move. Jace gripped the controls, his pulse hammering. The fleet tightened formation, the swift claw taking point with its drones. Below, Lirys burned under the Kryvox assault. And somewhere down there, Elra was waiting. He'd made it this far, 3 days. 4 ships. One hell of a gamble. Now it was time to fight. The stellar drift surged forward, leading the charge into the fray. The Kryvox turned to meet them, their tendrils thrashing in the void. Jace's jaw tightened, Elra's light flashing in his mind. For Lirys, he muttered, and opened fire. Chapter 6. Defending Lirys. The waters of Lirys churned with unease, their surface rippling under a sky streaked with green fire. Elra stood on the deck of her floating lab, her bioluminescent skin pulsing a restless violet as she watched the Kryvox ships descend. Their silhouettes were jagged and grotesque, hulks of stolen metal fused with writhing tendrils, their glow casting an eerie pall over the coral reefs below. The air thrummed with low-frequency vibrations. Their approach was no longer a signal on a screen, but a palpable threat shaking her world. Inside, her console beeped incessantly, tracking the swarm's movements. Dozens of ships, some small scouts, others massive freighters, spread across the atmosphere like a plague. Elra's webbed hands clenched, her glow flickering as she fought a rising tide of dread. The Voran Council's last message had been hours ago. Hold position. Defensive measures under consideration. Consideration wouldn't stop this. A sharp pulse of yellow light cut through her thoughts. Nyra's signature. Elra turned as the warrior Voran emerged from the water, hauling herself onto the deck with a splash. Nyra was a stark contrast to Elra. Taller, broader, her skin a deep teal that flared with aggressive reds when riled. Her eyes burned like twin flames, and a spear crafted from coral bone rested across her back. She was a protector, one of the few Voran trained to fight, though their battles were rare. They're here, Nyra said, her low-frequency voice a growl. Her light pulsed in short, angry bursts. The council's useless, sitting in their chambers while we drown. What's your plan, biologist? Elra met her gaze, steadying her own glow to a calm blue. We can't outfight them, Nyra, not with spears and nets. But we can outthink them. I've studied the Kryvox, they're drawn to energy signatures. We could use that, Nyra snorted, her teal skin flashing red. Use it how? Lure them into a trap with your glowing fish? This isn't a lab experiment, this is war. It's survival. Elra snapped, her light flaring briefly. I've sent a call to the humans. They might come. Until then, we buy time. Humans? Nyra's voice rose, incredulous. Those soft-skinned scavengers? You're betting our lives on a species that can't even breathe water? I'd rather die fighting than wait for myths. Elra's glow dimmed, frustration warring with resolve. Nyra wasn't wrong. Humans were an unknown. And Jace's silence since her message gnawed at her hope. But she'd seen his grit, felt his gratitude. One of them owes me, she said quietly. If he's alive, he'll come. I know it. Nyra stared, her spear shifting as she leaned closer. You're a fool, Elra, but fine. Tell me your trap. I'll fight with what I've got. Relief softened Elra's stance. She gestured to the lab's interior. Follow me. Inside, she pulled up a holographic map of Lyrys's eastern reef, a sprawling network of coral spires and underwater vents. The Kryvox track energy. Our city's power cores are too big to hide, but we can overload smaller sources, buoys, research drones, and draw them here, away from the villages. Nyra studied the map, her glow settling into a thoughtful orange. A distraction. Risky. They'll still come for the cores eventually. It's a start, Elra said. We rig the buoys to overload. Then arm the vents with pressure charges, crude. But they'll collapse the spires if the Kryvox get too close. We hold them off until help arrives. If it arrives, Nyra muttered, but she nodded. I'll rally the others. You handle your gadgets. The next hours were a frenzy. Elra dove into the water, her body glowing as she swam to the buoys dotting the reef. She rewired their cores, setting them to emit erratic energy pulses, bright enough to mimic a city's signature. Above, Nyra rallied a dozen Voran warriors, their spears gleaming as they hauled scavenged materials to the vents. Together, they packed the fissures with compressed gas canisters, makeshift bombs that could trigger a cave-in. Elra surfaced near a buoy, her breath ragged as she watched the sky. The Kryvox were closer now, their ships hovering low, tendrils probing the water. A scout broke off, drawn to the first overloaded buoy. Its green beam lashed out, vaporizing the device in a burst of steam and light. Elra's heart sank. They'd taken the bait, but it wouldn't hold them long. Nyra swam up beside her, spear in hand. It's working, for now. 2 more ships veered east, but the big ones are still heading for the central city. Then we detonate the vents, Elra said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. Force them to split up. Nyra grinned, a rare flash of approval in her eyes. You've got spine, biologist. Let's do it. They swam to the nearest vent, a towering spire aglow with coral light. Elra triggered the charge, and a muffled boom shook the water. The spire cracked, collapsing in a cloud of silt and debris that engulfed a Kryvox scout. Its tendrils flailed, then stilled, crushed under the weight. Above, another ship veered to investigate, buying precious minutes. But the respite was fleeting. A massive freighter loomed over the horizon, its hull pulsating with green veins, its tendrils slashing through the water toward the central city. Elra's glow faltered. Her plan was slowing them, not stopping them. Nyra gripped her arm, her voice urgent. We need more time. The villages. A crackle cut her off, a faint signal breaking through Elra's comms device. Strapped to her wrist, she fumbled with it, her light flaring with hope as a voice emerged, rough, human, and achingly familiar. This is Jace Calder, inbound with backup. Hold on, we're coming. Elra froze, her glow bursting into a brilliant white. Jace, she whispered, disbelief and relief crashing over her. He'd heard her. He was here. Nyra stared, her teal skin flickering. You're human, now? Backup, Elra repeated, her voice trembling with sudden fire. He's bringing ships. We just have to hold the line. Before Nyra could respond, the sky erupted. 5 vessels, battered, mismatched, but unmistakably human, dropped from orbit, their engines roaring as they plunged into the fray. Streaks of plasma and light cut through the mist, slamming into the Kryvox swarm. Elra's eyes widened as a smaller ship, the Stellar Drift, took point. Its hull scarred but defiant. They're insane, Nyra breathed, her spear lowering as she watched the humans charge. And they're ours? Ours, Elra said, her glow steadying into a fierce blue. She grabbed Nyra's arm. Come on. Let's make sure they've got something left to save. Together, they dove back into the water, racing to the next vent. Above, the humans fought with reckless fury, their ships weaving through the Kryvox lines. Elra's heart pounded, her light pulsing in sync with the chaos. Jace had come, against all odds. He'd come. Now it was her turn to fight. To keep Lirys alive until the tide turned. Chapter 7. The Decoy Gambit. The sky above Lirys blazed with chaos as Jace Calder's fleet slammed into the Kryvox swarm. The stellar drift rocked under a barrage of green energy, its patched hull sparking as Jace wrestled the controls. Through the viewport, he saw the Iron Hauler's plasma cutters carve through a Kryvox scout, while the swift claw darted past, its drones scattering light to confuse the enemy. The Rust Fang and Heavy Mule held the rear, soaking up hits with their reinforced armor. It was a brawl, messy, brutal, and barely coordinated, but they were holding. Jace's comms crackled, Elra's voice cutting through the noise. Jace, this is Elra, we're below, drawing them east with traps. Can you hear me? Elra. Jace's grin was fierce, relief flooding him, loud and clear. We're here, 5 ships, armed to the teeth. What's your status? Desperate, she replied, her tone steady despite the strain. They're targeting our cities. We've got decoys slowing them. But we need more. Got it. Hang tight. We'll thin the herd. He switched channels. Mara, Torin, push the big ones west. Lena, keep those drones flying. Dax, cover me. I'm going low. Low? Dax barked. You're nuts. Always. Jace shot back, diving the drift toward the misty atmosphere. The ship shuddered as it breached the cloud layer. Lyrys's shimmering waters rushing up to meet him. Green streaks lit the sky, Kryvox ships plunging after him, their tendrils thrashing. He gritted his teeth, banking hard to dodge a beam that boiled the sea below. On the surface, Elra and Nyra surfaced near a coral spire, their glows pulsing in sync with the chaos above. Elra's comms device buzzed with Jace's voice, and her light flared white with hope. He's here, she said, turning to Nyra. We need to coordinate, now. Nyra's teal skin flickered red, her spear gleaming wet. Coordinate with that? They're like eels in a storm, wild and sloppy. Wild works. Elra countered. I've got an idea. The Kryvox chase energy. My research proves it. Their sensors lock onto light and heat. We can use that. Nyra's eyes narrowed. Your buoys barely slowed them. What's different? Bigger bait, Elra said, her glow steadying into a fierce blue. Me, and the humans. I can amplify my bioluminescence. Mimic a power core. If Jace's ships drop flares, we'll lure the Kryvox into a kill zone. Risky, Nyra grunted, but a grin tugged at her lips. I like it. Where's the zone? Elra pointed to the eastern reef, its spires jagged and vent-laden. There, we've got charges left. Collapse the whole area if they swarm it. Nyra nodded, diving to signal the warriors. Elra raised her comms. Jace, I've got a plan. Can your ships drop light flares, bright ones? Flares? Jace's voice crackled, strained as the drift dodged another blast. Yeah, Lena's drones can handle that. What's the play? You're the decoy, Elra said. I'll amplify my light, draw them to the eastern reef. Drop your flares there, and we'll bury them. A pause, then a rough laugh. Crazy as hell. I love it. Give me a signal. I'll bring the party. Elra swam to the reef's edge, her body trembling with effort as she focused. Vorin could control their bioluminescence, but this would push her limits. She closed her eyes, channeling energy into her skin. Her glow erupted, first blue, then gold, then a blinding white that lit the water like a star. The Kryvox ships above pivoted, their tendrils twitching as they locked onto her signal. Now, Jace, she shouted into the comms, her voice echoing through the waves. Above, the swift claw streaked into position, Lena's drones deploying in a cascade of light. Flares burst across the reef, their heat and brilliance amplifying Elra's glow. The Kryvox swarm reacted instantly, scouts, freighters, a hulking dreadnought, all veering east, drawn like moths to a flame. Jace pulled the drift up, joining the bait. Mara, Torin, flank him. Dax, get ready to ram. The Iron Hauler and Rust Fang swung wide, their cutters slashing at stragglers, while the Heavy Mule lumbered into position. The Kryvox poured into the reef, their beams vaporizing coral as they hunted the light. Elra held her ground, her body aching as the glow drained her. Nyra swam beside her, spear raised. "They're in. Blow it." Elra triggered the vent charges. A chain of explosions rocked the reef, water erupting in geysers as spires collapsed. The Kryvox ships faltered, tendrils snapping as debris crushed them. The dreadnought roared, its core pulsing, but Dax's heavy mule charged. Slamming into its side, metal screeched, green ichor sprayed, and the beast listed, sinking into the chaos. Above, Jace fired the drift's plasma trap, punching through a freighter's core. It exploded in a silent bloom, raining wreckage. The Iron Hauler and Rust Fang pressed the attack, their cutters slicing through the swarm. Lena's drones danced, drawing fire as the humans carved a path. Elra's light wavered, her strength fading. Nyra grabbed her, pulling her to safety behind a spire. "You're mad," Nyra said, her glow a mix of awe and exhaustion. "It's working." Through the water, Elra saw the tide turn. The Kryvox swarm thinned, their numbers halved as the trap and the humans' relentless assault took their toll. The dreadnought sank fully, its green glow snuffed out. Above, the remaining ships scattered, disoriented without their leader. Jace's voice crackled through. "Elra, you still with me? We've got him on the run." "Barely," she gasped, her glow dimming to a faint blue. "You're insane." "Jace, takes one to know one," he shot back, a grin in his tone. "Mopping up now, stay put." The battle raged on, but the pressure eased. The swift claw chased down stragglers, drones herding them into cutter range. The Rust Fang and Heavy Mule bulldozed through wreckage, while the Iron Hauler picked off survivors. Jace circled the drift, his eyes on the water below, searching for Elra's light. On the surface, Elra leaned against Nyra, her breath ragged. The reef was a ruin, spires shattered, water clouded with silt, but the Kryvox were broken. Her glow pulsed weakly, a flicker of triumph. "We did it," she whispered. Nyra's teal skin flared orange, a rare warmth. "You and your humans. Never thought I'd see the day." Above, the sky cleared, the green streaks fading as the last Kryvox ship fell. The stellar drift descended, hovering low over the waves. Jace's voice came again, softer now. "Elra, where are you? We've got a world to save, and I owe you a hell of a thank you." She smiled, her light steadying. "Right here, Jace, right here." The battle was won, but the cost was etched in the shattered reef and the exhaustion in her bones. Yet as the human ships loomed overhead, Elra felt something new, a spark of unity, forged in fire and light. Chapter 8. The Gift of Light. The waters of Lirys stilled as the last echoes of battle faded, their surface reflecting a sky now free of green fire. Elra stood on the shattered edge of the eastern reef, her bioluminescent skin pulsing a faint, weary blue. Around her, the coral spires lay in ruins, jagged stumps where towering structures once glowed, but the silence was a victory. The Kryvox were gone, their wrecks sinking into the depths or drifting as debris in orbit. Above, the human ships hovered, their battered hulls glinting in the misty light of dawn. Nyra emerged from the water beside her, her teal skin streaked with silt, her spear resting loosely in her grip. Her glow flickered orange, a mix of exhaustion and reluctant awe. "It's over," she said, her low voice rumbling through the air. "Your humans pulled it off." "Our humans," Elra corrected softly, her eyes on the stellar drift as it descended. The ship settled gently on a flat expanse of reef, its engines hissing as they powered down. The airlock opened, and Jace Calder stepped out, his boots crunching on the coral. He was taller than she remembered, his frame lean but hardened by years, his dark eyes scanning the scene until they found her. "Elra," he called, his voice rough with relief. He crossed the distance in quick strides, stopping a few feet away as if unsure how to bridge the gap. "You're a sight for sore eyes." She smiled, her glow warming to a gentle gold. "And you're a miracle I didn't dare hope for." Her gaze flickered to the other ships landing nearby, Mara, Torin, Lena, and Dax emerging with their crews, their faces a mix of fatigue and triumph. "You brought an army," Jace chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "More like a gang of misfits. But they fight like hell when there's salvage on the line." He paused, his expression sobering. "You okay? That light show you pulled, it looked rough." "It was," she admitted, her webbed hand brushing her side where the strain still ached. But it worked. You came. Had to, he said simply, his eyes locking with hers. 20 years is too long to owe someone your life. Nyra stepped forward, her spear planting in the coral with a thud. You're the one she saved, she said, sizing Jace up. Her glow flared briefly red, then settled. Thought you'd be taller. Jace grinned, unfazed. Thought you'd be friendlier. Guess we're both surprised. To Elra's shock, Nyra laughed, a rare, deep sound that softened her edges. Fair enough. Human, you fought well. Didn't think your kind had it in you. Likewise, Jace replied, nodding at her spear. Those traps were brutal. Saved our hides up there. The tension eased, a fragile bridge forming between them. Elra felt a swell of gratitude for Nyra's strength, for Jace's courage, for the unlikely alliance that had saved her world. Words weren't enough, but she knew the Voran way to say what mattered. Jace, she said, her voice formal, drawing his attention. You've given us back Lirys, our home, our light. I owe you more than thanks. She reached up, her webbed fingers trembling slightly as they brushed her shoulder. A small, iridescent orb nestled there, embedded in her skin, a rare bioluminescent gem, a piece of her essence. It glowed with a soft, shifting light, alive with the energy of her kind. Nyra's glow flared in surprise, her voice low. Elra, that's, I know. Elra cut in, her eyes on Jace. With a careful twist, she detached the gem, a sharp pang rippling through her as it separated. The light dimmed briefly in her skin, but the orb pulsed brightly in her palm. This is a Voran gift, she explained, stepping closer to him. A part of me, given only in the deepest gratitude. It's yours now. Jace stared at the gem, his rough hands hesitating as he took it. It was warm, its light dancing across his fingers like liquid starshine. Elra, this is too much. I just paid a debt. No, she said firmly, her glow steadying. You gave us a future. This is what it means to us, to me. She closed his fingers around the gem, her touch lingering. It'll glow when I'm near. A bond, if you'll keep it. He met her gaze, a flicker of wonder softening his hardened edges. I'll keep it, he said, his voice low. Always. Nyra watched, her teal skin pulsing a quiet orange. She stepped closer, her spear lifting in a salute. You've earned more than trinkets. Human, Lirys owes you, and your misfits. Tell them that. Jace glanced at the other captains, who'd gathered near their ships, eyeing the exchange. They'll hear it, he said, slipping the gem into a pocket near his heart. But they'll want the wrecks first. Merchants, you know. Elra laughed, a sound like rippling water. Take them. You've earned that, too. The humans moved to their ships, their cargo arms already snagging Kryvox debris from the water and sky. Mara gave Jace a nod, Torin a grin, Lena a mock salute, and Dax a grunt that might have been approval. The stellar drift hummed as its crew joined the salvage. But Jace lingered, his eyes on Elra. You're not what I expected, he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Back then, I thought you were some kind of angel. Now, you're a damn warrior. And you're not the scared pilot I pulled from the swamp, she replied, her glow warm. You're a leader. Guess we both grew up, he said, then paused, his voice softening. This doesn't feel like goodbye. It's not, she promised, her light pulsing in sync with the gem in his pocket. You've got a piece of Lirys now. You'll come back. He nodded, a quiet vow in his eyes. Count on it. As the stellar drift lifted off, its engines stirring the water, Elra stood with Nyra, watching the ships climb into the sky. The wrecks were theirs, the victory shared, but something deeper lingered, a connection forged in light and fire. Nyra rested a hand on her shoulder, her glow steady. You were right about them. I'll eat my spear before I admit it again. But you were right. Elra smiled, her light brightening. Keep the spear. We'll need it for what's next. The dawn broke fully over Lirys, its waters shimmering with promise. The Kryvox were gone, but the scars remained, and with them, a new bond across the stars. Chapter 9. A New Alliance. The dawn painted Lirys in hues of gold and blue, its waters shimmering under a sky scrubbed clean of war. Elra stood on the edge of her rebuilt lab deck, her bioluminescent skin glowing a steady, hopeful green. The eastern reef bore scars, crumbled spires and clouded silt, but life was returning. Luminara fish darted through the wreckage, their lights flickering in patterns of renewal. Above, the human ships lingered in low orbit, their cargo bays heavy with Kryvox wrecks, a testament to the victory they'd forged together. Jace Calder's stellar drift touched down once more, its engines stirring gentle ripples across the water. He stepped out, the bioluminescent gem in his pocket pulsing faintly as he approached. Behind him, the other captains, Mara, Torin, Lena, and Dax, followed, their faces a mix of weariness and pride. Elra felt Nyra shift beside her, the warrior's teal glow pulsing orange with cautious respect. The air carried a new weight, not of battle, but of possibility. "You're still here," Elra said, her voice warm as Jace stopped before her. "I thought you'd be halfway to Earth with your salvage by now." Jace grinned, his dark eyes glinting. "Thought about it, but this," he tapped the gem through his jacket, "keeps pulling me back. Figured we should talk before I go." "Talk?" Nyra interjected, her spear resting lightly on her shoulder. "About what? You've got your wrecks. What's left?" "More than wrecks," Jace replied, meeting her gaze. "Lirys took a hit, but you've got something we don't, knowledge. Resources. We're merchants, not soldiers. This fight showed us what's possible when we team up." Elra's glow brightened, her mind racing. "You mean an alliance?" "Exactly," Jace said, spreading his hands. "Earth's traders are scrappy, we've got ships, roots, and a knack for turning junk into gold. You've got science, bioluminescent tech, stuff we've never dreamed of. Why stop at one win?" Mara stepped forward, her wiry frame tense but curious. "He's got a point. That light trick you pulled could be worth a fortune in navigation or defense." "I'd trade for it." Torin nodded, his beard twitching with a grin. "And your water's got minerals, rare ones. My rust fang could haul that to market. Big credits." Lena twirled a drone remote, smirking. "I'd kill for your sensor tech. Those Kryvox didn't see my decoys coming. Imagine what we could build together." Dax grunted, arms crossed. "Long as I get paid, I'm in, but don't expect me to swim." Elra laughed, the sound rippling through the air. Nyra's glow flickered, a mix of surprise and intrigue. "You're serious," Elra said, turning to Jace. "A partnership, Lirys and your merchants." "Dead serious," Jace replied. "We're not the alliance, don't care about politics or core worlds. We look out for our own. After this, you're ours, and we're yours. If you'll have us." Nyra lowered her spear, her voice gruff but thoughtful. "The council won't like it, outsiders meddling. But you saved us when they wouldn't. That's worth something." "It's worth everything," Elra said firmly, her glow shifting to a vibrant gold. "The Kryvox could come back, or worse. We can't stand alone anymore. Your ships, our light, we'd be stronger together." Jace nodded, his expression resolute. "Then let's make it official. A trade pact. Your tech and resources for our haul routes and protection. Equal stakes, equal say." Elra extended a webbed hand, her light pulsing in agreement. "For Lirys." Jace took it, his grip firm, the gem in his pocket flaring as their lights met. "For Earth." The other captains stepped up, sealing the deal with nods and grunts. Mara offered a rare smile. Torin clapped Jace on the back. Lena flashed a thumbs up, and Dax muttered something about credits but stayed put. Nyra watched, her glow steadying into a warm orange and unspoken approval. "We'll need terms," Elra said, releasing Jace's hand. "The council will want details, trade routes, resource shares, but I'll convince them. This is our future." "Got a head start," Jace said, pulling a datapad from his jacket. "Drafted it on the way down. Take a look." Elra scanned the screen, crude but clear. Bioluminescent tech for navigation. Mineral exports for salvage rights. Joint defense against threats like the Kryvox. It was a beginning, rough-hewn like the humans themselves. But solid. "It's a start," she said, her glow pulsing with approval. "We'll build from here." The Stellar Drift's engines hummed as the captains prepared to depart, their crews loading the last of the Kryvox debris. Jace lingered, his eyes on Elra. "We'll be back," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just business, it's personal now." "I know," she replied, her light matching the gem's soft glow. You've got a piece of Lirys with you. That's a promise. He smiled, a rare softness breaking through his rough exterior. And you've got a stubborn human who doesn't forget. See you soon, Elra. The drift lifted off, followed by the others, their silhouettes shrinking against the sky. Elra stood with Nyra, watching until they vanished into the clouds. The water lapped at her feet, the coral reefs below pulsing faintly, a heartbeat of recovery. Nyra broke the silence, her spear tapping the deck. They're odd, you're humans, but they've got fire. Maybe we'll make something of this. We will, Elra said, her glow steady. Light and fire, different. But they burn together. As the day unfolded, word spread through the floating villages. The council grumbled but couldn't deny the victory, or the potential. Elra worked late into the night, refining the pact, her lab alive with plans. The gem's absence ached faintly, but its light lived on in Jace, a bridge across the stars. Days later, a merchant ship returned, not Jace's, but Tauren's Rust Fang, its hold empty and ready for Lyrys's minerals. Trade began, tentative but real, the first threads of a web binding two worlds. Elra stood on her deck, her glow bright, imagining the future. Ships crisscrossing the void, Voran light guiding human paths. A partnership forged in battle and sealed in trust. And somewhere out there, Jace flew with her gift, a spark of Lirys lighting his way. The Kryvox were a memory, but the galaxy was vast, full of dangers and wonders yet to come. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together, their lights intertwined across the endless dark. Dive into The Light of Lirys, an epic sci-fi tale of courage and alliance. Elra, a bioluminescent Voran scientist from the waterworld Lirys, faces the parasitic Kryvox threatening her home. After saving human pilot Jace Calder decades ago, she calls for aid when the Galactic Alliance abandons her. Jace, now a scrappy merchant leader, rallies a fleet of makeshift ships to repay the debt. Together, they devise a daring plan using light-based decoys to defeat the Kryvox. Forging an unlikely bond, from tense battles to a heartfelt gift of light, their victory sparks a new alliance between Lirys and Earth's traders. Packed with vivid imagery, gripping action, and themes of loyalty, this story blends human grit with alien ingenuity. Subscribe for more thrilling sci-fi adventures.